It was 1986. The hair metal era was in full swing. Shoulder pads were a personality trait, and two of the most theatrical men in rock and roll ended up in the same movie. Nobody could have predicted what happened next. The movie was called Trick or Treat. It was a low-budget horror film about a dead rock star whose final album could summon demons. Ozzy Osbourne played a television preacher talking about the dangers of heavy metal music. Gene Simmons played a rock radio DJ. They were both cameos. They were both set maybe for each day, one day each. But here's the thing. According to everyone who was there, the two of them would not stop talking. I remember thinking, these two guys should not get along. Ozzy's this wild, chaotic force of nature. Gene is calculated, business-minded, always working an angle. But they were like old friends within an hour and just laughing, talking shop. I couldn't get them to separate long enough to finish their scenes. Gene Simmons, of course, was already a man with a plan. By 1986, he had been managing Kiss through some genuinely rough years. The band had dropped the face paint in 1983. They were trying to compete with younger bands and not entirely succeeding, and internally, the cracks were starting to show. Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons had built Kiss together, but by the mid-'80s, the tension between creative ambition and commercial pressure was becoming a real problem. Ozzy, on the other hand, was riding high. After being fired from Black Sabbath, he had built himself from scratch. Blizzard of Oz, Diary of a Madman, Bark of the Moon. The man had proved every doubter wrong, but he was also without a permanent, stable band structure. His lineup shifted, his personal life was chaotic. He had Sharon, and Sharon was a genius, but Ozzy still needed something he could quite name. What he needed, turned out, was Gene Simmons on bass. In our timeline, Gene Simmons stayed with Kiss. He never left. The reunion happened. The makeup came back. The machine kept rolling. But what if he didn't? Picture this. It's late 1986. Gene Simmons has just wrapped Trick or Treat. He and Ozzy have been talking for weeks by phone. Gene is exhausted. He's been carrying the business weight of Kiss on his back for years. He loves the band. He built the band, but he's also a man who has never once in his life turned down an interesting opportunity. And Ozzy Osbourne is offering him a very interesting opportunity. Gene Simmons announces he's leaving Kiss. The rock world loses its mind. Paul Stanley gives a press conference where he looks like he's been punched. The Kiss fan base splits right down the middle. Magazines run cover stories asking if this is the end of an era. Gene says nothing except, and this is the quote everyone remembers, "I'm not retiring, I'm upgrading." 2 weeks later, photos surfaced of Gene Simmons at a recording studio in Los Angeles, standing next to Ozzy Osbourne, both of them grinning like they've just gotten away with something. Sharon Osbourne, naturally, is the one who makes it all work. She sees the potential immediately. 2 monsters of rock under one roof. The marketing angle alone is worth millions, but Sharon also knows that Gene and Ozzy are not the same kind of person, and managing both of them at once is going to require a level of patience that most humans simply do not possess. She does it anyway because Sharon Osbourne has never backed down from a challenge. The first album drops in 1987. It's called Devil's Playground. The sound is massive. Gene's bass playing is thick and deliberate. Ozzy's vocals are sharper than he's been in years. The critics are divided. Some call it a genuine reinvention. Others call it a publicity stunt. It doesn't matter. It sells 4 million copies. The thing people forget is that Gene Simmons is actually a very good bass player. People focus on the persona, the tongue, the blood splitting, all of that. But the man could play, and when you put underneath Ozzy's voice, something clicks. It shouldn't work. On paper, it's a disaster, but it works. The tour that follows is one of the most talked about of the decade. Gene brings the Kiss production instinct, Firelights theatric scale. Ozzy brings the dangerous unpredictability that makes every show feel like it might go off the rails at any moment. Together, they create something that feels like a concert and more like an event. The second album, Blood and Thunder, released in 1989, is even bigger. It lands at number 2 on the Billboard charts. The lead single gets heavy MTV rotation. By this point, the Osbourne-Simmons partnership has stopped being a curiosity and started being a legitimate force. Here's the part of the story that nobody talks about enough. Gene Simmons had already done some acting. He was in Runway with Tom Selleck in 1984. He had screen presence, and he knew it. And after Trick or Treat, he and Ozzy spent a lot of time talking about movies. Specifically, the kind of movies that were making enormous amounts of money in 1986, action movies, big, loud, violent action movies. It was Gene's idea. It was absolutely Gene's idea. By 1988, the two of them are signed on to star in a film called Hellbound, no relation to the actual film of that name. In this version, Gene plays a mercenary, Ozzy plays a weapons dealer with a conscience. The plot is insane. A critic at the time describes it as what would happen if someone fed Commando and this is Spinal Tap into a blender and hit puree. It makes $30 million at the box office.
Look, they were actors, no, they were stars, absolutely. People came to see them because they wanted to see Ozzy Osbourne fire a rocket launcher and Gene Simmons stare someone down with that face. You can't teach that, you either have it or you don't.
3 more films follow between 1989 and 1985. They are objectively ridiculous. They are profitable. Gene and Ozzy become a specific kind of a cultural touchstone. The rock stars who somehow also became action heroes. Arnold and Sylvester are not losing sleep over it, but there's a genuine audience that shows up every single time. By the early 90s, the musical landscape is shifting, grunge is happening, the kind of big theatrical rock that Gene and Ozzy represent is being pushed into the margins. Sharon adjusts the strategy. The third album, Stone Cold Crazy, released in 1992, leans into a raw sound. It's a smart move. It doesn't fully work commercially, but it keeps them credible. They released one more album in 1996, Last Man Standing, which is generally considered their best, though by this point most of the press has moved on. Ozzy doesn't care, Gene definitely cares, but he pretends he doesn't. The movies slow down after 1995. The action genre itself is changing. 2 of them appear in a 1997 thriller that gets quietly buried by the studio and is never discussed again by either man. But here's what remains constant throughout all of it. The partnership, the friendship. These 2 men, who should have nothing in common except volume, have built something genuine together. By 1999, the conversations are already happening. Paul Stanley has kept Kiss alive with different lineups, but the reunion nobody could stop talking about was going to be, is Gene coming back? And it happens. In the year 2000, Gene Simmons rejoins Kiss for what is billed as the final farewell tour. He walks back on the stage, full makeup, and it feels, depending on who you ask, either like a betrayal or a natural end to a chapter. Ozzy, for his part, returns full focus to a solo career. Sharon orchestrates the Ozfest expansion. A few years later, there's a television show about a family, and somehow Ozzy Osbourne becomes beloved by an entirely new generation. They never officially break up the partnership, they just quietly stop.
I think they both got exactly what they needed from each other. Gene got to be wild for a while. Ozzy got someone steady enough to hold the thing together. And then they went home.
And that's the story of Ozzy and Gene Simmons in this what-if scenario.